Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow!
I always get the best parking spot.
I think she needs a little more help.
Monday.
What I really need is a boyfriend that can drive at night.
I can make a fashion statement out of anything.
I will be fabulous.
I have a little crush on my pharmacist.
With ComForCare at your side, you can live your best life possible. We know families can't be there 24/7, which is why we can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands, so you can live in your own home on your terms.
I won't let aging stop me from being me.
Call ComForCare now and let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match.
Can you show that number again? She was texting.
Together with ComForCare, you can both live your best life possible.
Call ComForCare at 503-636-0417. You're listening to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options to aging on your terms.
When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
Welcome to our podcast, Aging Today. This is the podcast where together we do explore the many options to aging on your terms. And as we always do, we want to thank our show sponsor, ComForCare Home Care of West Lynn, Oregon, and the caregivers. And the caregivers are scattered all over the nation. There's over 250 locations, and there are caregivers there to help you to remain independent in your own home. ComForCare is helping you to live your best life possible. And as we always mention in our podcast, we want to hear from you. And if you are a listener, a long time or even a first time listener, and you want to be able to see into the past, we've been on this show for about 4 years now. So we've got a big backlog of various topics and guests. And all you have to do is go to our website. It's agingtoday.us. And then also, if you want to reach out to me and suggest a particular topic that we haven't discussed, or maybe another one that we have discussed, but you want to go into a deeper dive, all you have to do is contact me through email, and it is mark@agingtoday.us. mark@agingtoday.us. All right, so one of the things that we always do is we have the pleasure of meeting a lot of different authors of various books. And as you know, this is the theme of our show is about aging, and it's aging with all the many options that are placed before us on your terms. And that's the key, on your terms. And one of the reasons why we started a podcast about 4 years ago was because we felt there was a huge void in the knowledge and the resources about the aging process. And aging happens, well, we always say that if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging. So our shows are all about aging process, and it doesn't matter the chronicle age, it has more to do with just aging. And so all of our shows are focused on experts in their fields and helping us to navigate the waters of aging. And one of the things that we all share as human beings, and that we've all said at least probably at one point of our lives, is that whenever you face a task or you face an accomplishment in life, or you're challenged with something new, there's that common phrase that comes out, now what? Now what do we do? Well, we have an author on today that has addressed that very issue about the aging process and, focused on the theme of now what? Now what do we do when we find ourselves suddenly a senior and aging? So here today on the show to join us is David Crum. David, welcome to Aging Today.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. The theme of your show very much resonates with the audience that we write for through our publishing house and online magazine, and caregiving and coping and the gifts of aging really are key themes for a lot of the projects that we undertake.
Yeah. Now, tell us, our listening audience, a little bit about you, David. As I was reading your biography a little bit, or all the accomplishments that you've made in life, it sounds like you've been a writer and a journalist for many years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started working as a journalist in the early 1970s, so I'm revealing that I'm up there in my age as well. I'm 65, going to be 66 this year. So I've had a very long career in journalism. Most of that was reporting for major newspapers and magazines, primarily in the U.S. and mainly out of Michigan, where I'm based. But I've reported from around the United States. More than once, I've reported from Oregon. I've also reported from Europe and Asia and the Middle East. And a lot of what I specialized in through the years was religious and cultural diversity. So communities around the world that have special identity, that have special meaning for people in all their diversity. And so in 2007, when I left newspapers and decided to try something new in my, I guess you'd call it my third phase of life, we established a publishing house, and we've published a couple hundred books since then, and an online weekly magazine called readthespirit.com. Every Monday, there's a new lineup of stories. And a great deal of what we've published has been books about, I think we've done 8 or 9 different books about coping with cancer, several books about caregiving, several books about combating bullying for a happier life. So the theme of your show and the theme that you're reaching out to your audience with, this is real close to our hearts. A number of times through the years, we've done major projects where we pull together many different community groups and authors. And what you're asking me about is this latest project where we had at least a dozen authors across the country and something like 12, there were about a dozen major nonprofits. And they included groups like the Area Agency on Aging. Folks who know aging resources know that area agencies on aging have a lot of resources for folks. So we put together this project, and very proud of it. It came out this year, and very close to my own heart and my own life's work as a journalist. So
as a journalist, and I'm assuming back in the 60s, I'm 63, so I'm right on your heels, young man. So we have much to talk about. And so did you have in your educational training, and did you have a religious training as well? Because it sounds like you do a lot with spirituality, whatever that means to you.
My degrees are in writing and comparative culture. I went through the University of Michigan the first time in the 70s, went back for a graduate research year on global cultures and media. I've done fellowships at the University of Maryland. I did one in Asia with the East-West Center. Most of the academic work I've done has been on how communities sustain themselves in this rapidly changing world with so many pressures. And so, yes, religion's a key part of that. I am not a seminarian. I didn't go to seminary. But how do these communities in this rapidly changing world sustain themselves, strengthen the folks within them, and help folks to have a meaningful life?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we're certainly in our culture today going through a little bit of a shift, and maybe what your next book will be writing about where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, I think that to some extent that's something we write about a lot at our publishing house before we accept a book for publication. And I should say, since we're talking to your audience out there, we publish authors from all over the United States. We've published some from other parts of the world as well. We're a mid-sized publisher that specializes in publishing works that might not make it to the big five publishers. So let me give you an example. We published a book called The Black Knight that is new last year, and that's the memoir of the oldest surviving Black graduate of West Point. Harry Truman signed an order integrating the Army, and Colonel Cliff Worthy was in that first class of 6 African-American cadets, last surviving one, and it's his life story. When we accept a book to publish, our test is, will this book make the world a little better? And our motto has always been, good media makes healthy communities. So, there are many, many ways that we are working with individuals, and we also work with a lot of nonprofits and universities. We work with several universities. Our goal is to be that media arm there that's putting the stories out in the world that might not get out there in other forms of media.
Yeah, well, and it seems like that's kind of the new trend today, is not going with what you call them the big five, but there's a lot of smaller publishing companies propping up because of some of the restrictions that the bigger publishing houses have. I know my mom, she was a bookstore owner, or an independent bookstore owner, and she really enjoyed that in her life. And it was fun for me, being an avid book reader myself, because I enjoyed going down to the bookstore and picking up all the books on the shelf, and the family discount was amazing.
That always helps.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. So let's dive into the book currently that you have. Now, not only were you an author, a contributor to it, you were the editor as well.
Yes.
And the publisher.
Yes, that's right. I'm the co-founder of the publishing house. Our publishing house was founded by our publisher, John Heil, and myself as editor. So we're the two founders and co-owners of the publishing house. And I'm not this hands-on with every single book we publish, but each year there are always several books that I take a personal, passionate interest in. In this case, our family is like millions of other American families. We suddenly got hit with care issues related to aging, where one day we didn't have a clue in the world that we were going to need to think about these issues, and then the next day, suddenly, we had to think about things and learn a whole lot about things that we didn't know anything about. In one instance, it was my father's disability. He is gone now, but in his late 80s, he developed an ALS-like condition, and it's called supranuclear palsy. And suddenly, almost overnight, we had to find care options for him. And then in my mother's case, it was a hospitalization and an inability to return to her home. And overnight, we're suddenly having to become experts in stuff we didn't know anything about. And so one of the things I'd always been hoping to do was to create a book that just lays out 24 topics and says, hey, if you're like a lot of us are, and one day you suddenly need to know a whole bunch of stuff about caregiving that you didn't know yesterday, grab this book, and there's probably a chapter in it about it. And it's the sort of book I wish we'd had, my wife and I, as we went through this. We had to wait a little while. Here in Michigan, there is a public health fund run by the state, and they awarded us a grant to pull together this book. So this was co-sponsored by the state of Michigan's public health agency. And they said, yeah, put this book together. And so far, we've been getting it in the hands of lots of folks. Now, not every chapter in the book. For example, there's a chapter in here about what happens when you can't drive anymore. Well, that may not be the issue that you particularly need to know about. But there's also a chapter in here about how to make your home safer. And if you've had, let's say, a hip replacement, or you've fallen, or you've got issues around the home, if you go through that home safety chapter, it's, many of your listeners have already done this with an occupational therapist, or somebody else has come in and helped them make their home more safe. But, everybody's got to do it the first time. And so we put that checklist in there. So that's the idea.
Yeah. So let's talk about the title. Now what? I love that title, and I love the impetus behind it, or at least as far as I understand it. You get to that place, and whatever suddenly you find yourself in, the common phrase is, now what do we do, right?
Yeah, those literally are the two words that most of us utter. And, you get the call and you sit down and you're feeling perhaps grief or anxiety for your loved one. And you turn to each other, perhaps your spouse or partner or friend, and you say, now what? And you don't know what the next steps are. The subtitle of the book, I think, is just as important, The Gifts and Challenges of Aging. And it may surprise people to see that word gift in there.
Yeah, it did me, David. Yeah.
So the nonprofit foundation that sponsored pulling together all of these partnering agencies that helped to read and put the book together for us, started off on day one saying, we want this to be a strength-based book. We don't want this to be a book that you hand people and it's like you've just gotten a death sentence and nobody in their right mind wants to read this book. We want a book that also celebrates some of the gifts of aging and also points out that people should be able to age in place. People should be able to make their own decisions about their care. People should be in charge of what they're doing. And so that whole concept became the theme of the book. So yes, we do deal in the book with some of the serious things that happen. For example, there's a chapter in there about explaining what hospice care is. That's a kind of a grim topic, I suppose. Although in my own family, we've had very positive experience with hospice through the years. But there are also things in the book. There's a chapter in the book that might actually make people chuckle a little bit about some of the remarkable things people have done in advanced old age. There's a section in the book that talks about the most popular jobs people find after age 65. So there's a lot about taking the aging process as a natural part of life, making our own decisions, aging in place, retaining our autonomy. And it sounds like that's very much the kind of theme that you talk about on your podcast.
Yeah, almost all those topics. And when we got into this industry about 8 years ago, we have an in-home care agency. So we provide caregivers so that seniors can age in their own homes independently, whatever that means to them. And so one of the things that we did was we went and educated ourselves in this industry and the aging process. And so we got our certified senior advisor designation. This would be a wonderful book to add to their curriculum, because I went through all of that training, and many of the topics here would be really apropos to that fellowship.
Because our publishing house is connected to our weekly magazine online, one of the things that we always look for is stories of real people, just like you do for your podcast. So if there is anybody out there who's hearing this and does wind up taking a look at this book, or simply wants to contact me and say, hey, I've got a few friends who'd like to take a look at this book and talk among ourselves. In this first year, we're trying to encourage some local groups around the country to pick up the book, talk about it, and we'd like to be in touch with them. We'd actually like to hear from them what they think, what their ideas are. There are a lot of places in the book where we give lists of suggestions or ideas, and when people read the book, they may have their own ideas. I did check before we started talking today. We do have one discussion group already planned for this fall in Oregon. It's not in Portland. It's two Episcopal churches. One's in Waldport, Oregon, and one's in Newport, Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Right on the coast.
On the coast there, it's St. Luke's Episcopal and St. Stephen's. They're going to have a group. They're going to focus on bringing together about a dozen folks who might be interested in helping with in-home caregiving. And they're going to use the book and talk about it as they try to energize those folks. And then we're going to talk with some of the folks who've looked at it. We really want real people to tell us their stories of, how they interact, what they think, how is this helpful to them? How could it be better? So it's we're in that phase right now where we're talking to folks across the country, and I that's one of the reasons I was so thankful that you called about this podcast.
Yeah, well. First of all, David, I know that you're a man that has spent all his time on the East Coast or the Midwest. And you know how I know that?
Tell me.
Okay. So the ComForCare is a national brand for in-home care, and their headquarters are in Michigan. And when we first went back to Michigan, everybody called Oregon. And I look I look at them and I go, Oregon didn't go anywhere. It's still on the map. It's still right where it used to be. So it didn't go anywhere. So I don't know what it is about the East Coast and upper Midwest and the propensity to want to say Oregon, but it's acceptable. I'll take it, but I always have a good chuckle about it.
Well, thank you. And I'm always eager to learn regional variations. And so I appreciate your explaining that to me.
Yeah. Well, I think people, from different parts of the country, we will say different things, whether it's down south, they got their own language down there. And so the way we pronounce things, they have to probably chuckle as well. So let's take a little bit of a dive into the book. And I love the way you guys had laid out all the different chapters. There's 23 chapters. And it starts out with "You're Not Alone." And tell us a little bit about why you placed that at the front of the book. I think I can surmise that. But tell our listening audience, and what is the common theme about "You're Not Alone"?
So when we think about aging, and if somebody's if somebody's motivated to get a resource about aging, they're gonna pick a video to watch, or they're gonna pick up a magazine cover story, or pick up a book. They may be typically what they're going to find, or what they may be looking for, is something that says how not to age, right? It's how to look younger, how to feel younger, how to feel healthier. And we have this kind of bias where we think that aging is this terrible thing that is going to creep up on us, and we associate it with disease or disorder or disability in our lives. And the truth is that, of course, from just as you said at the top of the show, from the day we're born, we are aging. And when you begin to think about it this way, you realize that the greatest threats to us, that challenging part, the challenges of aging in our subtitle, the greatest threat in aging actually is not disability and disease, it's isolation. The number one threat to our happiness, health, well-being, and longevity is isolation and exclusion. Now, when you hear me say that, you may say, well, here's this guy who's written a lot about religion, giving us a spiritual message. They're actually, we're now living in an age when the public health councils around the world, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, World Health Organization, the Canadian healthcare system, all focus on this broad spectrum of things that we need as we age called social determinants of health. And these are often, if you see the charts online, they're real easy to find. They'll look like a flower with petals coming out. And actual medicines and medical procedures is just one little petal on the flower. All the other petals on the flower are things like safe neighborhood, interaction with neighbors, meaning in life, access to healthy foods, ability to walk around each day. So social determinants of health, with the professionals that put this book together, there's actually a whole chapter in the book just about that subject. They wanted us to make sure we explained it. A much more common way, I think, that a lot of people hear this idea, and this is thanks to our colleagues at National Geographic magazine. About 15 years ago, they published this issue that kind of changed the way a lot of people talk about this. They published this issue that described these areas of the world with exceptionally happy, healthy, and long-lived people, and they called them the blue zones of the world. So this is another way to think about social determinants. And they dug in and they looked at what these communities were. There's one in Japan, there's one in Loma Linda, California, and one of the very first things they discovered about these communities was that they call it purpose. In these communities, people had reasons to wake up in the morning. In the Japanese blue zone, for example, there actually was a social expectation that every day you would check in with 5 or 6 of your friends in a meaningful, caring way. And so people had these connections. So there's even a chapter in our book that points out, however you feel about religion and spirituality, in fact, it is a healthy thing to join a congregation simply because you're more active. There are people around you. There are people caring for you. You've got more purpose in life. I'm certainly not saying that God waves a magic wand and makes you healthy if you go to church. But fundamentally, the aging process, the richness, the health, the happiness, the well-being in the aging process is all wrapped up in that sort of question. In fact, the Blue Zone people have a website out there where they talk about this, and right on the website it says that the most important question you can ask yourself is, why should I wake up in the morning? And we've actually got that question in our book too. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would begin to answer that question you raised. Is that a helpful response?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're hardwired, we're designed as human beings to not be alone. And we all have variations off of that. Some people are a little bit more loners than others. But when it comes to the aging process, there's a lot of new things that are entering into our lives, and we become a little bit more fearful. We're fearful of the unknown, and what lies ahead. And we begin that's a great time of reflection in our lives, and to begin thinking about past relationships, and on it goes. So I think that it's a great way for you guys to have started out your book, and bringing that assurance to the reader that what you're feeling is not abnormal. Is that pretty much what you guys were trying to do?
Yeah, very much so. So as families begin to think about the aging process, yes, there are some real practical things that they need to know. So for example, there's a chapter in this book that's let me just pick one at random. It's Dress for Success. And this was written by a social worker who works with older folks. And it's just a real helpful chapter that says, as we age, we may need to think about our clothing in a different way. And if you're not aware of it, you need to realize that there's some adaptive clothing that may make us feel better, or be able to walk longer, or, and don't shy away from that. when my father, for example, got deeper and deeper into, I'm going to refer to it as ALS because people know what that is, got into his ALS-like condition, we needed to help him move. Well, how do you help another adult move? There were all kinds of things that are commonly available to make that much easier, and we were clueless. We didn't know how to do a transit from a chair to a wheelchair or from a wheelchair back to a chair. We didn't know the safe way to move from a wheelchair to a car. But once you have a little training or you have a little background to know, hey, there's an adaptive strap that you can get. There's some different kinds of clothing you can wear to make it easier to put your outdoor coat on. Suddenly life becomes a lot easier and less of a struggle. So we do deal with some of those really practical things that, hey, if nobody's told you that these things exist, there's no way you're going to know it. But overall, a lot of what we're saying in this book is don't think of this period of life as a time when, we're progressively turning the lights out in the house until there's no light left in the house. We say again and again and again in the book, whatever your age or stage or ability in life is, there are remarkable things you can do. An example that I can give you from my own family of my mother, who passed away late last year in her 90s, reached a point where she had to have a wheelchair to move, very difficult for her to get around. And she had this remarkable outreach she did where she simply wrote letters to people. And that was one thing she could do. And the people who got her letters in the last couple of years of her life were just thrilled. So, here she was in her 90s, the subject of intensive care every day just to keep her going. And here she is, brightening lives all across the country by writing these letters. And here she is building this national community of letter writers. It was just remarkable. So, on the one hand, some of the answers we want to give people in the book is, hey, here are the things you need to know to prepare for a doctor's visit. Real practical, down-to-earth stuff. But on the other side of that, we're trying to say to people, it's almost impossible to envision a limitation on your life if you're still alive and you wake up with a spirit to do something creative and helpful. You can find a way to do something creative and helpful. And when you do, that's going to be a better day than it would be if you didn't have something like that to do. So that's really the spirit of what we've done here.
Yeah, as I was going through your book, and I just want to piggyback on a lot of the things that you've already said, David, and that is that it's a very practical guide. It's a very practical book. And, if I could go back to the clothing, just simple things like clothing. Maybe you've been newly diagnosed with Parkinson's, and you find it increasingly difficult to button your shirts. Well, they make shirts. You can do pullovers or you can do snaps. The Velcro is really good with seniors, and as we age, the dexterity that it takes to tie your shoes. That's where Velcro can come in. So I do really appreciate the practicality of this book. Now what? And all the implications that it brings to seniors as they're aging.
Yeah, the adaptive. You mentioned adaptive appliances and ways we can adapt our lives. In my long career in journalism, I worked for Knight Ridder newspapers back in the 90s on a major project about suicide in the U.S. And I don't mean to turn our conversation here dark for people, but what are the reasons that people might contemplate suicide, particularly as they age? We know that there are many reasons, stress, and we know many of the things that can lead to suicide earlier in life. But how about later in life? Well, one of the big ones later in life is incontinence. Mm-hmm. If you're embarrassed about your ability to go to the restroom, you may stop going out. You may be an active member in your church, and suddenly you feel, maybe I can't go because I'm embarrassed. but what you discover is that if you can figure out the adaptive things that a whole bunch of people all across the country use every single day, that doesn't need to stop you. I'll never forget that in the 90s, looking at, as a reporter, I looked at a couple of cases in which people literally took their own lives simply because they became incontinent and they were embarrassed about it. And, I've known a bunch of people now who are later in life, and that isn't an issue. I mean, they do deal with that issue, but they adapt to it. Let me take a much more common one. Maybe you can't reach down to put your socks on or your shoes on. You just mentioned this. There are real easy tools to help you pull your socks up, and you can go with Velcro on your shoes, or you can get even at 65, 66 years old, I have a long handled shoe horn I like to use in the morning rather than bending down there to pull my shoes on. Many of these things seem incredibly difficult when you first hit them. I'm never going to be able to reach down there and pull my socks up again. Life is over, right? You can catastrophize about those things. But when you discover that there are millions of folks out there who've figured out what the adaptations to those things are, and they live with it every day, and they have happy lives, suddenly you discover that, hey, man, I can keep chugging along here for a long time.
David, there's a chapter in there called Sagging, Not Aging. If you would, take a few moments to describe this chapter to our listening audience. And I love I don't know who wrote this one. Was this you or was this another author?
No, and I thank you for saying it that way, because kind of like you corrected my Oregon, I want to correct your pronunciation on that. It's saging.
Saging. Okay, gotcha.
Saging, not aging. Although many people who read this book send me notes and say that thing on sagging, and they spell it with 2 G's. So everybody reads it that way.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And because when you think of aging, a lot of us, in a negative way, think of what? Everything's going south. It's sagging.
Right.
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 And that was the first thing that came to my mind. But I love the way that chapter starts out. It says, "It shall not be that time will leave its imprint on me. Rather, I shall leave my imprint on time."
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that chapter was written by Najah Bazi. Let me say her name again because it's an unusual name. Najah Bazi. Some of your readers may actually know who she is. 2 years ago, she was one of the CNN network's national heroes. They have these CNN with Anderson Cooper has these 10 people who are American heroes for a year. She was one of those. Last year, she was a People magazine hero. And this year, because we're here in Michigan, her face is on Lay's potato chips bags, of all things.
Wow.
And her expertise is called transcultural nursing. And she describes that as learning from the cultures of the world about different approaches we can take to healthcare. And what she essentially argues in that chapter is that in our culture, particularly our American culture, and particularly American popular culture, we tend to value youth so heavily that we tend to discount the value of the elders among us, the folks who have aged, the folks who have wisdom, the folks who might be able to help us in ways we can't even imagine. We tend to focus on, the 20-something hotshot who invents something new. And I'm all about encouraging young people to innovate. But what Najah essentially says there is we can look at aging as something to fear, or we can look at this as a part of life in which we are becoming the sages, in which we have real wisdom if we look within our lives and find that wisdom that we can share with others.
Yeah. And I think and passing that from generation to generation, the legacy that we can pass on is part of the whole aging process.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite chapters in this guide?
Well, I'll tell you the one that I hear. Well, let me answer it this way. I'll tell you my mother's favorite chapter in this book when she read this at let's see, what was she? She was 94 when she read the draft of this book. It's a chapter called Our Gifts, and it's about people who weren't successful until after 65. And she just laughed over this chapter. For example, she was a big fan throughout her life of Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. And when we were kids, we used to watch the
Little House on the Prairie.
Little House. Laura Ingalls didn't publish that book until she was 65.
Yeah.
Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes didn't come out till he was 66. He kept writing till he was 78. Now for among your listeners, I love the story about Harlan Sanders, and on the History Channel, I think they just recently did an hour-long documentary about the story of Harlan Sanders. For 2 years, I worked as a journalist in Kentucky, in the heartland of Kentucky, and did a lot of reporting on the Colonel Sanders and KFC story. He was essentially a failure in life. He had a great way of cooking chicken. He had a great recipe, and his big innovation was that he learned to cook it faster. To put it real simply, he developed a pressure cooker that didn't work with water, that worked with oil. So you could pressure cook chicken and cook it real crispy and good fast. Mm-hmm. And he was pretty much a failure, had lost pretty much everything he had. And when he turned 65, he took his first Social Security check and he used it to make a cross-country trip trying to sell his idea of franchising this kind of chicken. And he sold his first franchise, of all places, in Salt Lake City, Utah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, Salt Lake, of all places.
Of all places. Well, they love their chicken out there. The Mormons love their chicken.
Yeah, I guess. I didn't know that. I would think that would have gone down in Alabama or Georgia or in Mississippi. But Utah? Yep. Nope, that's not my first guess.
No. My mother also was a huge fan of John Glenn. And loved the fact that Glenn went back into space at age 77. And so this was one of her favorite chapters, was just all these people who did these remarkable things late in life. People who are still out there teaching yoga in their 90s. There is so much more you can do after 65. If you think about Harlan Sanders, if he'd looked at his life and said, you know what, I'm getting this Social Security check, I'm going to get a little room here somewhere in Kentucky and just relax on the front porch, we never would have heard of KFC today.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many stories like that out there, as you were eloquently describing there. Is there what else was in the John Glenn? I love that story. Was there something else in here that was another good story? Well,
let me see. She one of the ones that she was a big fan. My mother was a big fan of Grandma Moses, and I grew up knowing about folk art. My parents were big believers that even children should go to art museums. Mm-hmm. But Grandma Moses' real name was Anna Mary Robertson Moses, and she did not even start painting until 76.
Wow.
Which was pretty remarkable. There's a guy I've always wanted to. I wished I had done, as a journalist, I wish I'd done a story about this, a guy named George Weiss. And he was one of these guys who just enjoyed going downstairs and tinkering in his basement. And he tried to invent a whole bunch of stuff. And he, in his 80s, he invented this game called Dabble. And you play it with these letter tiles. It's kind of a fun game. And at age 84, he helped to develop the Dabble telephone app, which you can still get. It's like a word puzzle game. Some people may have it on their phone. The guy who thought that up was just a guy who way late in life was going downstairs tinkering in his basement. And at age 84, he launched one of the most successful game apps on your phone.
Huh. Amazing. So that's your mom's favorite chapter. How about your favorite chapter?
I probably enjoy most some of the writing at the end of the book. And there's a chapter in there called Our Story, Our Legacy. I believe firmly as a journalist that every single individual out there has a unique and valuable story to tell in their lives if someone helps them figure out what that story is and helps them to tell it. So, as people are listening to this podcast, they may think, oh, he's not talking about me. He's talking about famous people. No, I'm not. When I teach journalism 101 courses, one of the assignments that we give people in the workshops, years ago when we taught this, we'd pull out a telephone book. Nobody's got a telephone book anymore. But we would randomly pick a name in the telephone book, and we would assign each student to do a story on whatever people we just randomly picked. And we would say to them, the story is always there. In each one of these lives, there's something. You got to go find what it is. So one of the things I love doing in the newsroom of the Detroit Free Press, which at the time was one of the country's 10 biggest newspapers, I took a regular rotation every 3 months, doing a few days on the obituary desk. And obituaries would come through of people, and I loved finding what their story was, and I could always find the story. And one time it was a woman who religiously every morning went out and fed birds and squirrels in her backyard. And she did this to such an extent that other neighbors began feeding birds, and their neighborhood became recognized as one of the few places in Michigan to find particular rare species of birds. What a gift in this woman's life. You'd find somebody who their great story was when they're a veteran and when they served in the armed forces, or you find somebody and it's did a profile of a fellow who built wooden carts in his wood shop out back of his house that other folks shipped in containers to Africa for people who had lost legs to landmines. And these carts were self-propelled vehicles where they could just push this wooden propeller thing on it and get around. This is just a retired school teacher. What a remarkable story. So my favorite part of the book is the place where we essentially tell folks, even if you don't think it, you've got a story to tell.
Yeah.
You've got wisdom in your life. And think for a minute, step back and think for a minute what that story is or what that wisdom is. And, one of the most popular stories that we published in our online magazine last year was a woman's recipe for minestrone soup. And it was a woman who lives in northern Italy. And we put her in touch with a family in South Carolina that also had family recipes for minestrone soup. And we just compared their recipes of minestrone soup. There were little different ingredients. That thing got thousands and thousands and thousands of readers. I don't know how many gallons of minestrone soup were cooked up as a result around the world of sharing that one story, right? So when I talk about gifts of aging, this is really the heart and soul of what I'm talking about. We each have these invaluable stories, these gifts we can share, this wisdom we can share. And, yes, I'm like everybody. When I wake up in the morning, I've often got an ache or some pain or some anxiety that I've got to deal with. But, focus on what's that story you've got to tell? What's that wisdom you've got that maybe it's a recipe for minestrone soup.
Yeah. And we talk about that all the time, how important stories are. Stories are the heart of every human being, and we are a story inside of a bigger story in life, and we are the authors. We hold the pen, and we get to write our stories, and it doesn't end till it ends. And even at the very end, there's a chapter here on hospice. And one of the things that we say about hospice care is that just because you're at the last chapter of your life, you still hold the pen. You still are in control. And I want seniors to know that they can dictate their final chapter. And they get to write it, whatever that means to them. And that takes, when you hear that takes away a lot of that fear that seniors may face, or maybe they don't, but maybe they do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. My wife and I live in near the University community of Ann Arbor, and lots of very independent folks in Ann Arbor, and we are part of a congregation, a large university congregation there, where people there don't even tend to call hospice until the last minute. And so if we get an email that says so and so is called hospice, it means probably they're going to be gone in a day. I am a big believer that that's a myth about hospice. In our experience in our family, and we've experienced care from several different hospice organizations. You can be involved with them for half a year or so. You can actually leave hospice. You can, it's one of those things that can keep you in the driver's seat. Help you make decisions, and help you with palliative care, so you can just get up and make it through the day. It may not be the choice for everyone. There may be some who don't care for that, or you may be connected with a hospice program that you don't like. You may want to look around a little bit at the program you're going to select at that stage in life. But I agree 100% with you that if you believe what I'm saying here, which is that we've each got this uniquely valuable story that our lives represent, we've got something unique to tell the world, we've got some unique wisdom in us, then you want to be the author of that whole story. You want to be. You use the word hold the pen, and I'm a pen on paper writer. I use a computer every day too, but. Anything you can do to be able to get up in the morning, have a purpose to get up, you've got some meaning in your day, you've got some folks you're going to see, some folks who care about you. You've got a way that your story is continuing in the world, that's making a difference in other people's lives. And it may be to the point where you can't even move around anymore, and all it is that you're, like my mom was in her final months, you're just writing a letter that's going to brighten somebody's day. That's a meaningful life. That's a story you're writing that it touches you deep in the heart.
Yeah, and you want to end it well, and I think that a lot of people are afraid of that, but at the same time, when you are there and with people that are at the last chapter, the last moments of their chapter in their lives, it can be a very surreal and peaceful time of an individual's life, knowing that they've taken care of everything, their relationships. And we see a lot of that too, where people reconcile maybe some of the past relationships that that didn't go so well in their lives. And it's a great time to have those people come over and sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah, we actually published several other books about that process that you're describing, and it's a very powerful process. And it's you're talking about issues of forgiveness, and then a related topic, which is issues of reconciliation. It is possible for me to forgive something that happened in life and yet not reconcile. For example, if it's maybe the person's gone who was involved, maybe the person would continue to be a danger if I reached out to them. There may be reasons where you can't necessarily reconcile with someone, but forgiveness is always within our reach. And we've published, I think 3 or 4 books about the process of forgiveness, and I think it relates right back to the central theme that you're talking about, which is recognizing, that issue of saging, not aging. We're focusing on writing the narrative of our life. We're understanding what our life story is about. We're understanding what wisdom we have that we can share with folks. And so do we need to also hang on to this painful other baggage that our mind keeps returning to, like a paper cut on your finger? One of the most powerful books that we've published in recent years is a book called Light Shines in the Darkness by Lucille Sider out of Chicago, who's a psychotherapist. And she writes about the process of her forgiving her family for some traumatic things that had happened in her life. And it might sound like a horrible book to read, but it's a beautiful book. In fact, the front cover of the book literally shows sunlight coming through trees. It's a really transformative process. And sometimes as we age, you get up later in life, and this is the time when, if you've had trauma earlier in life, maybe it suddenly resurfaces because you got time to think about it. And so this notion of I'm in charge of my life, I'm in charge of the narrative of my life, and I can make choices about my life, including what I'm going to allow to continue to bother me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your raising that, because I think that's a real important theme too. I totally agree.
Yeah. David, talk a little bit more about the company as a, where you have all these, the publisher, where you have all these books. What's the name of the publishing company again? Because you rattled off a bunch of books there. And not only for myself, but for my listening audience, they go, oh, I got to get that book. I got to get that book. Where would they find those?
So there are two ways to find us. First of all, I'm very happy to share my main email address, which is my name, david.crum, C-R-U-M-M, @gmail.com. So if somebody's listening to your podcast and they're saying, hey, I've got a life story. Would you take a minute as a publisher and let me know if you think there's actually a book here? I do that every single day. I get emails from people, and I can't spend hours, but I'm happy to respond. So just my email is one way. Our online magazine is called Read the Spirit, the word read, R-E-A-D, thespirit.com. And then our publishing house is called frontedgepublishing.com. And so those are three ways to find us. My last name, just my name, Google my name, and you'll find us. I'm everywhere, David Crum, C-R-U-M-M. We do a lot of work with folks who take seriously what I was just talking about, that maybe they do have a story in their lives that is worth telling. And we help them think through whether that can become a book. Now, I would say we probably get, a dozen inquiries from people for every one where we're able to kind of pursue a conversation. So we're not, we don't take all comers, and we're not a self-publishing house where people can simply write us a check and we take every idea. But we never know unless we talk to people, and more than once people have just Lucille Sider, who did this beautiful book Light Shines in the Darkness, it just came through an email, and we talked a bit, and we discovered that her story was going to be very helpful to lots of other folks, and we wound up doing that whole project.
Yeah, and your story can be inspiring to others, because a lot of times, we're all human beings. We're all on this planet together. We're experiencing some of the same emotions and same adversities and same victories in life. And sometimes what we share, we take the time and write that down. It can be very nourishing. It can be inspiring to other people as you tell your story. That can bring a lot of healing to other people's lives.
Mm-hmm. That is absolutely correct.
And I love stories in book. I love stories in the movies. I wish Hollywood would do more stories. Stories like Private Ryan. They take a truth and they throw it alongside some they make up a lot of stuff, but they follow the life of that individual. Those are great stories, and they're so inspiring. There's lots of them out there like that. Well, let's get back to the book. Now what? Now what, Dave?
The main point I'd like to raise and leave folks with is we published this book to help people, and we really are interested in hearing from people anywhere in the U.S. who might say to us, hey, I'm interested in that book, and I've got a couple of friends Maybe they're members of my church. Maybe you're not even part of a church. It's just, hey, me and a couple of my neighbors, or I've got a couple of friends at work. And we'd like to look at this book. We'd like to get a couple of copies and maybe talk about it. Maybe we've got some ideas we'd like to share. I want to have conversations like that with people. I welcome that. The reason I know about these two churches in your state, I'm not going to say the state again because my Michigan pronunciation might be jarring.
You have my permission. Go ahead and say it because I love hearing it. It just cracks me up.
I welcome those contacts because it is in sharing those stories with other folks that we build awareness. And so I look forward if anybody hears this podcast and wants to get in touch with me, I'm easy to find, and I would welcome hearing from you.
All right. Well, it was a delight to have you on the show today, Aging Today, David. And I encourage all of our listening audience to pick up the book, Now What? And it's a great read. It's a great guide to the aging process. And I've read a lot of books out there, and sometimes they can be, a little bit heavy on the intellectual side. This book has a great combination, a good feel for, good resources, but yet a practical guide at the same time. And I hope that's what you guys intended to accomplish, because if that was, then you accomplished it.
I could not have said it better. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and your listeners today. Thank you so much for your kindness, reaching out. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
And once again, how do they best get a hold of you, David? So let's say somebody really is excited about talking to you. What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, I'm very public about the email address that I just gave you, so I'll give that again. That may be the simplest. Mm-hmm. David standard spelling, and then a dot. And then my last name is spelled CRUMM @gmail.com. I'll say the name of the magazine one more time. It's readthespirit.com. Publishing house is called Front Edge Publishing. But my name is kind of an oddball name. And generally, that email or just a Google search of my name and you're going to find me.
All right. Well, David Crum, journalist, publisher, and author, thank you so much for being on Aging Today. And I know our listening audience has gained a lot from your wisdom, and continue to write. Continue to help us to navigate that journey of aging. We really appreciate you being on today's show, Aging Today. This is Mark Turnbull, your host. Thank you for tuning in to Aging Today, the podcast where together we do explore the options to aging on your terms. Join us again next week for another lively discussion on Aging Today. And remember, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be fun. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. so young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.